There it is, splendiferous London. Lit bridges girded over the serpentine Thames, jeweled honeycomb of hope and joys and love, misery and power. This century's high plateau, vulnerable before the plagues and epidemics that will surely come. Flight from Vienna, 16 February, 2013. I'm Chris Agee, and that was one of the many micropoems in my fourth collection, Blue Sandbar Moon, published in 2018. I'm going to read entirely from this collection. Blue Sandbar Moon is a book about bereavement and its aftermaths, both personal, a death in the family, and collective. Blue Sandbar Moon has two distinct sections. The first shorter section, with slightly longer poems, is entitled Proem, an old word for introduction still in use. The second section, consisting of 174 micropoems, is entitled A Microepic, spanning a decade of my life and moving between Ireland, where I live and work, of course, Scotland, where I also worked part-time for many years, and the Balkans, where I have a house in Croatia on one of the Dalmatian islands. For some further sense of the overall structure, I'll read a few paragraphs on both Blue Sandbar Moon and my previous collection, Next to Nothing, also about the bereavement, in an essay I've written entitled Sundial and Hourglass. A Scottish friend and colleague who read Blue Sandbar Moon very carefully described the whole thing, Proem and a microepic, as a single, quote, emotional architecture, end quote. This is my favorite description, and I quote it frequently at readings or when individual readers and writers ask me about the collection. Also, in an astute take on the book's emotional architecture, my son Jacob described its personal and political double light as both, quote, sundial and hourglass. Sundial in the sense that each year section records the annual round of seasons and dates, including, amongst much else of that architecture, the time signatures of anniversaries and remembered sorrows. Hourglass in the sense that the book opens in the proem with a more outwith or collective sense or soupçon of bereavement as a world historical force, before proceeding to the more inwith, like the narrowing of an hourglass. Then towards the end of the collection, from about 2014, there is a return to the more outwith, socially and politically, notably the micropoems on another visit to the Hague tribunals, Ukraine, the Holocaust in Croatia, the Syrian exodus, Germany and Israel, and so forth, whereby bereavements and sorrows become again more world historical, so like the bottom of an hourglass spreading outwards. I'm going to read 4 poems from the proem. The first is on Srebrenica. Summer plums. In the valley before Srebrenica, the corn was the tallest I've ever seen. Someone was reaping by sickle what looked like lavender. Another was scything silage. Several places, women in kerchiefs and pantaloons were sat on the grass before their houses, looking out. Low, steep hills ringed the valley with thick woods. There were domed Bosnian haystacks pinnacled with poles and shells of ruined houses colonized by undergrowth. It seemed right to return, to renew fields and gardens amid beckoning ghosts of family and neighbors. A cow was led on a rope by an old woman in the same dress, and a girl in shorts walked the road to Potocari. A windfall of apples was down in an orchard, and silken plums scattered on a forested lane. 2 headstones stood in a cornfield like a summer host of thousands of splendid ears. The Neretva is a beautiful river that flows from the Bosnian mountains to the Croatian coast. Neretva restaurant, in memory of Miriam. I'd forgotten that half an hour or so until a few days before our bus swung in again to the sloping roadside restaurant perched on an overlook high above the dazzling Neretva, threaded below the white conical minarets and strip fields, the Yugoslav pylons of beautiful Jablanica. A pumped and cobblestone rill was bubbling from top to bottom through a series of gutters, water wheels, pipes, and cement fish tanks where trout were penned in dappled beauty. 8 lamb spits filled the air with wood smoke and its smell. I remember a quick lunch and nothing of Miriam, but love and presence. At the back, in the woods below the dining deck, a breath of presence. Ash flicker and maple leaf flutter in the high heat of Central Europe. I stood perspirant with Jacob and watched far below a brown, pebbled submarine sandbar like a trout's speckled belly in the crook of a wooded bend. Depths turquoise, shallows green, under another day's dazzling blue river. On the terrace of our Croatian house. After rains, a large seed parachute from a plant's pod floated up from the night yard and rose into the door's lamp shine on fresh air's slightest breath, like thistledown in slow motion, a snow crystal or some sea creature out of the abysmal depths. I knew before I tried I would never find it. It was so linty and delicate, so immaterial, it would vanish as spider's web on the wet earth's solidities. It reminded me instantly of that first May thistledown after apocalypse. When I moved forward, it moved off and down towards the dark beyond the table legs. When I searched the veranda flagstones, half lit in penumbra, it was nowhere to be found. When I shone a flashlight close up on the stone, there was still no trace of its image, a trout fly reeled in. Some low undercurrent probably took it from my ken. It felt like a last omen, approached and touched me, and returned to the night. There was a huge snow in Dublin, which everybody remembers, in, I believe it was 2011. It reminded me a lot of the snow in Joyce's great short story, The Dead. And this is a turning point. This is the aftermath. This is the turning point where things started to look up a little bit for me. Snow in Dublin, Epiphany. The snow one always knew but had never seen, save in the background scene of the Joycean Dead, was muffling down in Marion Square, St. Stephen's Green, doe-eyed flakes in the plate glass of the O2 shop on Grafton Street. After that gallivant across Ireland on the Enterprise, when I found propped miraculously on a snowy railing the glasses case I had dropped in the daily slush. In a snow-laden atrium in the Liberties, the world was transformed. I felt it in myself, drifting and drifting. How had I got this far? To the unconditional, the irreplaceable, hinging optatively on a flickering departures board. Beautiful heart manna of snowy Dublin, like a fine Jewish linen, muslin or damask, covering now, time enough, the old world of my defeated days. I'm going to move on to a whole series of very short poems, micro-poems, in the wider micro-epic. Almost all the micro-poems carry a small caption at the end, marking either the actual genesis of the poem in terms of actual time and or the composition of the poem. Sometimes they were almost coeval, happening at the same time. Sometimes it could be a day or two or even a week or two where the genesis of the poem, having sat with me a little while, came to verbal birth, as it were. So after most of the poems, I'll read a small caption. None of the micropoems have actually a title. The first line, which is in slightly larger type, is, as it were, just stepping into the poem. This is part of the structure of a microepic. Titles would interfere with the flow of little tiny poems that take place over 10 years. So each poem is as if we're stepping into another moment in my life. And over 10 years, they accumulate into what my friend called an emotional architecture. 9 years ago today, your sister was deathly ill. Now, by chance or happenstance, in St. Paul's, under the lantern and golden gallery, readings and addresses, a string quartet, silence is kept, giving way or given away when the cock crows to the crowds on this Good Friday. Silence is kept from the liturgy, St. Paul's Cathedral, London, Good Friday, April 2010. Maybe nothing today, as I will walk past the place where I held your hand on the curbside towards a little window where your bright face bid me goodbye every day. One magpie pecking the grass, foaming sea surf of the memorial magnolia, kids in the daffodils, the birds singing again, and the eternal scent for me of your life, like the two blossoms on the dining table, unfaded as Chinese feeling in the cut crystal bowl of invisible waters. Anniversary of Miriam's death day, Belfast, 4 April 2010. This is a small poem about climate change. It's sometimes thought that noctilucent clouds are a sign of the chemical changes that are changing the atmosphere. It's a particular sort of cloud, quite beautiful. Deep in lush Longford, the smell of slurry, birdsong and cow parsley on stilled verges, old domain walls ivied with ivy. I piss through a rusted curvilinear gate towards countryscapes under noctilucent clouds, the canary in the climate's coal mine. County Longford, 5 June 2010. The village where our Croatian house is located is called Žrnovo. Finally, it came, the flutter flash from the fig to the laurel, when over morning coffee, the golden oriole unburdened me of the fear of the pain that is always in new life. Žrnovo Garden, August 2011. Well, this is a Sarajevo poem. The last morning, after the last night, the crescent moon, like Islam's slender cusp, by a lobe of dark, waxing towards plenitude in our new lives. Departures, Sarajevo Airport, 24 October 2011. Another Žrnovo poem. Spend a lot of time in the garden. We have a whole raft of different kinds of trees, almonds, pomegranates, figs, cherry plums, and so forth. Trees are wonderful living creatures. But sometimes you have to cut them. Sometimes you have to be ruthless in order to save them. I was afraid of the cuts we made to the almond the day before, because it is easier to live in the old growth of dead shade than face the heartwood's fresh crosscuts and cleared spaces of new vistas, like a moth still stuck in the shadows of a dawn window. Dawn, Journal, 2 May 2012. Nano was a worker who, when we were renovating the house, planted a tomato patch that Miriam liked. Poor Nano, not much of a worker, a bit of a fuck-up, what with the drugs. Yet it was he who planted the tomato patch, giving it half-hearted attention, like so much in life. Or later, early one August morn, I would take a photo of Miriam holding her bowl of tomatoes that even still holds her still life on the hall wall above the vanished scene. On the Terrace, Journal, 7-8 August 2012. A Glasgow poem written during the first years I was regularly working in that city. The crescent moon and morning star, clear over antennae and chimneys, the lit windows of close hallways, the big birch windy, and some other pinprick of hope, strung spangling to the acute angle of planets and tenement. Events steam the building's human breath in the blue first light, rising to a first day in the promised land. Fotheringay Road, Glasgow, autumn 2012. In 2013, because of my interest in the former Yugoslavia, the Bosnian War, and because of my actual presence at the end of the siege, I went to the International Criminal Tribunals for the former Yugoslavia and spent some time, like Darwin was spending time watching the finches, I spent some time watching the human species and trying to figure out why people do things like were done in Bosnia. And I felt that the destruction of human personality, both in the dead, of course, but also the destruction of human personality in the survivors was just so intense as I sat there that one night this poem came. I watched the bats tumbling and the morning star, maybe, over a garden in The Hague, one house lit in hope, the tree's top shifting and swaying, ebbing and rising, ducking and fainting like one night's sorrows, without catharsis, remedy, or acquittal, in the natural history of feelings, destruction. After the War Crimes Tribunals, The Hague, 17 July 2013. Another poem in the Journal garden. The world welcomes me back, warm sun on my brow, like an old friend at the open casement, swung open to the eternal blue, where once I saw and suffered in the night coolth. True apocalypse, next to the same almond below, now stumped and weathered in the black earth, wetted and fresh with the tears of night rain. Early morning, Journal, 14 September 2013. I traveled back and forth for many years between Glasgow and Belfast, always taking EasyJet and became a kind of ecological villain. And of course, in Belfast, the gantries, the cranes from the old shipyards. No more shipyards, but the gantries are still there. One of my political poems. Yellow cat's cradles of the old gantries, in the dawn's sulphury blue, a twinkling EasyJet preparing to land behind a row of poplars, silhouetted as if a besom broom blown out of the east from the Ukrainian drama, where history has hardly ended. And Davos, be aware and be apprised, with your Faustus of capital running amok and wrecking its havoc. The mass ethicalized here too may yet arise like a Luther or Brecht to defenestrate banksters and oligarchs in a collective catharsis, to roll the tumbril for your shameless self-indulgences. Says at least this easy passenger. Belfast, Glasgow, 25 February 2014. Another Journal poem. It's an old village, all sorts of trails and forgotten things that can never be quantified. The value is in your psyche. In tradition itself, you can't quantify or make anything economical out of it. The old trail, actually an antique road, thin, long cobbles, lost in weeds, between gates and walls, through goat sheds, through centuries, a right of way, whose new value in inherited awareness cannot be reckoned globally. Birdo Shortcut, Journal, 15 September 2014. Then, as everybody remembers, there was the Syrian exodus. And many people will have seen the little boy found on the beach by the Turkish policeman. His little legs dangling at the stooped crux of a Turk's arms. Someone had tied his shoes that morning. He was ready to go with only love. He knew not where, now lost to existence. Even the shite sun saw life and death. The one who didn't make it, as we did and still do this day. Death of Alan Kurdi, photograph near Bodrum in the Aegean, 3-5 September 2015. Again, this is the Journal Garden. There's a path that runs through the land and towards neighbors' houses. This too is about the catastrophe that's happening in the Mediterranean with refugees. The poppies are proliferating in June on the communal path through our land, back towards old Miko and Austria-Hungary, on the map of the subtle hues on the hall wall, the 7 states of his span, the 8 wars of a Balkan century, or forwards towards the sea dead off Roman Libya, or the Aegean's inflatable coracles or corpses, heading to the end of the nation state in a new republic of equal lives. Ireland, Croatia, June, July 2016. Heaney crops up from time to time in this book, of course. And here's one of the 3 or 4 poems about Heaney. The Heaney Road is now not much to look at. A weary, declined borderline crossroads between Balachi and Castle Dawson. the ancestral place next to the Tin Hut, an old remodeled pub with a poet's corner. The road worker stopped for directions with a tint of Scots, the scent of mown grass out with the prison of death. But where is the ferry road you took us on, so far inside, in with your life? Between Balaki and Belfast, June, July 2016. This is a poem in memory of a dear friend who died in the summer of 2016, who lived nearby our house in Croatia. I imagined Vojka on Korčula at sunrise, 3 days after her death, and saw the afterlife as the preservation of the past only. Miriam and Osman and all the others gone across the whale road to the dark land, somehow sharing and somehow all aware of the moments when we had really loved. An epiphany crossing Pelishat's channel, early morning, 24 August 2016. And I'll conclude with the passage that ends the book, a famous passage by Paul Celan, who of course had gone through his own darknesses. And this is the only text from 2017. The book effectively ends in 2016. Only one thing remained reachable, close, and secure amid all losses: language. Yes, language. In spite of everything, it remained secure against loss. But it had to go through its own lack of answers, through terrifying silence, through the 1,000 darknesses of murderous speech. It went through. Thank you.